Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And of course, this video we're going to start with the most important part of the front lines, with Battle of Robotyne, as the Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny, the head of Ukraine army, called this battle as the Battle of Kursk. You know that during the Second World War there was one of the most important battles, the Battle for Kursk. The USSR won that battle, and basically that moment was the moment when the entire situation was changed in Russian favor. So this is the same battle according to Zaluzhny, the Battle of Kursk of 21st century. And as we see, the Ukrainians are not counting their losses. They're sending more and more forces, more and more troopers and infantry in the direction of the settlement with one purpose: to defeat the Russians and to force them to step back. As we discussed in the previous video, today the Russian sources published the videos of convoys, endless convoys of armored vehicles that were heading in direction of Orekhov, and probably after that they continued their movements in direction of Robotyne and Verbovo. The Russian sources reported and confirmed that those forces that were redeployed according to those videos haven't been involved in the battle yet, When talking about Robotyne itself, today we have at least 3 geolocated videos from the settlement. The first one took place in the southern part. We will not discuss this video, but according to this video, the Ukrainians managed to attack, to defeat the Russians, to force them to step back further to the eastern part and even further to the Novopokrovka, the settlement located in the south of Robotyne. And the Ukrainians managed to capture few Russian soldiers in this area. And basically this is the geolocation that confirms the presence of Ukrainian forces in this area. The next geolocation we got from the northern part. The Russians were bombing and shelling the northern part of the settlement with artillery rounds, with cluster rounds, with missiles, with Grad systems, and so on. Basically, as you can see, the concentration of fire in this area means that there are no Russians in the northern part, that the Russian forces were moved to the south or even further to the Novopokrovka. So this is the reason why the Russians are not counting their rounds, and they're attacking this area heavily. And the second geolocation we got from the central part of the settlement, where the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy their armored vehicles to the south, probably some reinforcement, but that was some kind of ambush. Some Russian soldiers managed to penetrate the area to get very close to the Ukrainian positions in the central part, and after that, from the hidden positions in the forest lines, attacked those armored vehicles and basically destroyed them. So -2 Bradleys during just a few seconds of battle. So the situation is critical, the situation is very difficult, and for now the Russians are trying to counterattack, but as you can see, they are not doing this for 100% power and force they can. The Ukrainians continue their movements, continue sending more and more forces in the settlement, trying to force the Russians to step back. Furthermore, we have some changes in the doctrine that Ukrainians use during the assault of the settlement, and the first changes that we can discuss and we can mention is that Ukrainians started bombing not just the Russian positions in the southern part of Robotyne, but also the Ukrainians started bombing the trenches that located a little bit on the south from Robotyne, but not in Robotyne itself. So in this video we see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions along the trenches, along the forest lines that goes from Novopokrovka to the Russian positions in Robotyne. Basically, according to my understanding of the situation, according to geolocated videos we have, the Russians are not sending their forces to Robotyne, let's say, using fields and using roads. The main forces, Russian forces, enter Novopokrovka, and after that, using the trenches and underground tunnels or something like this, and the tunnels on the surface, trenches on the surface, the Russians are redeploying their forces in direction of Robotyne using this road. This is the only safe, we can't call this road as a safe, but reading quotes, this is the only safe road that the Russians have to move and to send reinforcements in direction of Robotyne, and furthermore to make some kind of evacuation from the same settlement from the south. The Ukrainians from their side established complete fire and artillery control over the only road that goes from, let's say, Tokmak in direction of Novopokrovka. The Ukrainians today published the video, to be more precise, the Ukrainian tank brigade, the 47th Mechanized Brigade, the tank battalion of 47th Mechanized Brigade published the video how they established control over the Russian positions, over the supply road. We see the endless convoys of the Russian forces who were heading in direction of Robotyne. In the opposite direction, another empty vehicles or probably vehicles with the wounded soldiers were moving back in direction of Tokmak. As you can see, the Ukrainians didn't have any problems. They don't have any problems to attack this area. They established 100% control. They have a lot of drones above this territory. The Russians, as we can see, can't do anything with drones. They basically can't shut them down. Maybe they have equipment, but they can't get their equipment of electronic warfare closer to the combat line, because as soon as they do this, the Ukrainians start using drones and artillery system to destroy and to hunt this type of weapon. So basically, Robotyne, or the southern part of the settlement with the Russians, currently is an operational encirclement. Of course, the Russians from their side establish almost completely the same control over the Ukraine control supply roads. The Russians, for example, today were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions, their operational ammo depots that the Ukrainians were using to supply and support their forces in Robotyne. Furthermore, the Russians attacked the Ukrainian reinforcement and their forces who were heading in direction of Verbova. So the situation is completely the same for both sides, for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. Maybe the Russians have a little bit better positions because their trenches were not destroyed during the clashes of the previous days. And when talking about the Ukrainian positions, all of them are under fire, under complete fire control, artillery control. So of course the Ukrainians have bigger losses in comparison with the Russians. Furthermore, the Ukrainians currently try to develop and accumulate their forces, to concentrate their forces before the next wave of attack in direction of Verbova. As I understand, the Ukrainians realize and understand that Robotyne is about to fall, and the next thing they're going to do is to attack Verbova. And during these months, we got at least few videos from the edge position of the settlement, how the Ukrainians were tracking this area, and after they discovered another Russian positions, they started attacking this area with artillery, with HIMARS and so on. So the battle of Robotyne is about to be finished, and this is going to be a very important battle that will determine the next phase of the special military operation. Basically, this battle will determine the beginning of the autumn campaign, and as you know, the Ukrainians are planning to launch another wave of mobilization, but about mobilization we're going to talk a little bit later. Now we are moving further to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Either the Ukrainians and the Russians continue concentration of their forces, and either the Russians and the Ukrainians try to attack each concentrations of each other with artillery strikes, with guided bombs, with the missile strikes. And probably these attacks gave some results, but because we see that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have relaunched their offensive or counter-offensive operations, from the Ukrainian side we see that they also established some control over the main supply arteries that goes from this, let's say, the southern part of this area to Staromlynovka, Staromayorska, and Zavitna Bajanye. So just regular clashes, artillery duels without any actives on the ground. Now we are moving to the South Donetsk area, and today we got also a lot of interesting updates from this bridgehead. The Ukrainians made a small attempt of reconnaissance in combat in direction of Mykolaiv. The Russians managed to discover those positions, those movements, and started bombing and shelling the Ukrainians in the fields. As a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians were forced to step back. But during those attacks, that operation, the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian positions in Mykolaiv, and as a result of artillery strike, probably another, let's say, concentration Russian checkpoint or stronghold was destroyed. When talking about Donetsk area, today we got a lot of updates from Krasnogorovka. The Russians continue storming the settlement from the south. The Russians continue storming the settlement from the east. There are very fierce clashes all over the combat line around the settlement. The Russians continue their effective counter-artillery duels, and as a result of another episode of such duels, the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian artillery position, and to destroy this position along the railways. But if we increase the number of updates, so we discussed the situation many times, we see the Russian concentration of their fire against the settlement. But today we got another very interesting geolocated video from this area, and I'm talking about this artillery strike, probably with Krasnopil shell, against the railway bridge that goes from Kurakhove in direction of Krasnogorovka. As you can see, there are two things that we need to discuss. The first one, and the most probably interesting, is that Ukrainians still have possibility to use the railways to supply and support their forces in Krasnogorovka. As you can see, the Russians attacked the bridge that was established above the Kurakhove reservoir, and as a result of that attack, probably that bridge was damaged, and from now on the Ukrainians are no longer able to supply and support their forces using the railways. And this is very important because this is another stage, another episode of the Battle of Krasnogorovka. And currently the Russians' main purpose is to suppress artillery positions, suppress drone positions, suppress anti-tank positions, reduce logistic possibilities, and as I understand based on the events that took place during the previous months, the Russians are almost ready to start their offensive operation and to start storming the settlement, at least from two sides, from the south part and from the eastern part. But maybe not tomorrow, and I believe another month. They need another month, but sooner or later this operation is going to start, and probably and maybe some forces like Wagner or Storm Z troopers will be redeployed in this direction for this operation. Now we are moving further to Bakhmut area. Today we haven't received a lot of updates from this bridgehead. For example, if you remember, and probably the most important update took place in the vicinity of Zeleznyanska. If you remember, yesterday we discussed the Ukrainian attempt to attack in this direction. The 30th Mechanized Brigade of Ukrainian forces published the video how they were storming the forest in the vicinity of Zeleznyansk on the northern flank of Artyomovsk. And based on the video, we can make a conclusion that that attack probably was very effective because the Ukrainians managed to get the edge positions, they managed to land their troopers, they managed to clear the forest. We will not watch the video till the end because of violence and casualties among people, but anyway, that video was published on the Independence Day of Ukraine, and that video shown us a very nice progress of the Ukrainian forces. And I probably ask myself whether I need or not to change the color of this map of this area, but I told myself that for now I would not do this because we need more details and more visual confirmations. And today we got some confirmation from the Ministry of Defense of Russian side. Of course, this is not enough in comparison with the Ukrainian video of that offensive operation. The Russians reported that Ministry of Defense that as a result of Ukrainian offensive operation in this area, they managed to repel that attack. They managed to force the attackers to step back and to restore control over the forest. Of course, the Russians haven't provided us any video or photo confirmation of that, but as I see when talking about other mappers, nobody talks about the situation, nobody has updated their maps, so that's why we will keep the situation as is, but we will follow, and if we get another confirmation about the Ukrainian control, of course we will update this territory. At least half of the forest will be colored in yellow color. Now we are moving further to the Siversk bridgehead. The situation is the same. The Ukrainians continue attacking the Russian positions in the vicinity of the Lysychansk oil refinery. We see the concentration of Ukrainian fire. We see almost the absence of the Russian counter-drone duels or counter-artillery duels in this area. There were just few updates from the Spornet that the Russians are trying to capture and probably storm since the beginning of this special military operation, but without any results for now. And furthermore, as you can see, there is no progress from the Russian side, and it's very difficult to understand what exactly is going to happen there. But we see how the Ukrainians are storming and attacking the Russian positions in the settlement. Now we're moving further and we're going to the Kremenная forest. Today the Ukrainians published the video how they were bombing the settlement, the forest. We are using this video just for geolocations to understand the positions of the Russian and the Ukrainian forces. According to this video, the 67th Mechanized Brigade was bombing the Russians' positions, and we see that the front line is static, no changes, no movements from both sides, no developments and no improvements. When talking about the Kupiansk front front line, the same situation, and probably today was the first day since the beginning of the Russian greatest offensive counter-offensive operation, the Kupiansk front line, when the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation haven't told us about any progress of the Russians along the combat line in the vicinity of Sinkovka. So the Russians started that offensive operation in Sinkovka on the Kupiansk front lines around 3 weeks ago, and probably first days were very successful, and the Russians managed to develop their positions in the vicinity of Sinkovka, Novoselovka, Kislevka, Kotlarovka, Karamzinovka, and so on. But that was a very slow operation. We understand why, because the Ukrainians did have and do have a very powerful trenches and fortifications defense line in this area, and the Russians were too slow, which led to the situation that Ukrainians during the previous 2 weeks managed to redeploy enough of forces to collapse, and not to collapse, to stop any attempt from the Russian side to counterattack. Of course, the Ukrainians were forced to pay significant price for that, because we also see that that Ukrainians are no longer making any attempts to attack in the vicinity of Klishevka and Andreevka. And the main reason of that, the main fact why the Ukrainians stopped any offensive operation in Bakhmut, is that they were forced to redeploy a significant number of forces in Kupiansk just with one purpose: to stop the Russians. But this is not the final update from the Kupiansk and Kharkiv front line. Today, the Russians published a lot of videos, a lot of geolocated confirmations about the artillery duels along the combat line, along the border. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainians' positions, the concentration of forces, the Ukrainians' armored vehicles, the Ukrainians' ammo depots. So a lot of attacks, a lot of updates, a lot of destroyed vehicles, and maybe this like a regular routine on the combat line. If we calculate the distance and the lengths of the front line of the Russian attacks, of course it's too big. We understand this. But today we got also another update from the Ukrainian side, from the local authorities, that Kharkiv local authorities took a decision to increase the level of mobilization, to speed up this process and to increase. And of course we understand the reason of this mobilization. We will return back to this situation in a second. Furthermore, we got a very interesting update from Zelensky office that the military authorities forced the Ukrainians to Zelensky to increase and to speed up mobilization, because the Ukrainians understand that the forces they spent in Zaporozhye battle, the losses they had during that battle was too heavy. The Ukrainians need to mobilize before the next spring campaign, so let's say in a year, before the next year, around 200,000 soldiers before that date, and this should be strategical reserves, untouchable strategical reserves. Currently, the Ukrainians mobilize around 7,000-9,000 per month, but this is not enough, and these 7/9,000 soldiers even are not enough to cover the current losses. So that means that Ukrainians need to launch a total mobilization that will have like two main direction. The first direction is to cover the current losses, and the second direction is to create and accumulate strategical reserves before the spring campaign, military campaign of the 2024. And this is the reason also why the Ukrainians have increased the level of mobilization in Kharkiv. Few reasons. First of all, to follow the main message of Kiev, and the second one is probably the Russians are going to attack in Kharkiv direction, in direction of Kupiansk, in direction of Kharkiv. Probably the Russians are going to launch or try to encircle Kharkiv from many directions, or even capture. And of course, the Ukrainians understand that if the Russians are going to attack Kharkiv, then the best solution for them is to start mobilization among the civilians and population of Kharkiv. So among those people who can be captured. There are a few reasons. The first one is psychology reason, is if your let's say father, brother, or someone died during this operation, of course the relatives will start hate the Russians. So it's like the media purpose to increase the level of aggression from local population against the Russians. So this is the main purpose why the Ukrainians need to mobilize people from Lvov to fight for Kharkiv. And if the Russians are able to take Kharkiv, they will get population, they will get a lot of people, those people who haven't suffered as a result of Russian offensive operation. So anyway, a lot of evidence, a lot of things tell us that anyway, the next stage and the next step of the Russians is going to be attack in direction of Kharkiv. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds me, condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.